on, family? Let's see if I can get a better angle on me. And so today we're going to talk about Black assumptions and Black faculty in the classroom, specifically in higher education. As I kind of share just like my thoughts and my experience, I'll first just talk about the journey to becoming a faculty member is not one that is easy. Okay, I think even the mental shifts and the mental transitions that it takes to be a faculty member is not one that's like you can just go into a classroom and just start teaching, right? But there's curricula, there's pedagogy, there's having your own philosophy, there's instruction, right? So being able to instruct. There's a lot more to it than just, hey Joy, than just teaching, right? Just being able to teach, just being knowledgeable about teaching. But you have to really have a system of operations. And so I've been teaching now at the college level since 2010. I started teaching in a social justice leadership experience for RAs. And so when I talk to folks about like transformation and how I got to this place, it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people who put together curriculum and created space for people to be able to volunteer to teach students. And so when we talk about social justice and we talk about like equity and inclusion, we trying to move forward, right? Like we got to first put ourselves in a position to be able to volunteer for initiatives that's already going on in the community that we already exist in. And so I wanted to share that first because I think a lot of times folks are like, Dar, like we know you from whenever, from wherever, from however, right? And I wasn't this guy. And I'll be honest in saying I wasn't the diversity guy. My transformation really happened with students and really focusing on the development of students and seeing that I was teaching them things that I wasn't practicing in my own life. And that is a big part of the transformation. I even think about like when I graduated from grad school, I sold all my books back to the campus. Like I was like getting rid of, so like I had like maybe 3 books, starting my professional career. 10 years later, my library is stupid. And so reading, if you want to transform, especially as it relates to social justice and you're not reading, you're not going to be able to actualize that transformation because you're not staying up to date with the information that's being put out about the work. But I don't want to go into that. I'll also say that I'm I've recognized the privilege that I have of being a faculty member with a master's degree, right? I am in my doctoral program. I am officially a doctoral candidate, but there's a lot of folks who don't get a look at their resume in any industry or any discipline because they only have a master's degree. And so with that, know that the transformation also for me is not just about showing that I've done the work, but it's also showing that I'm committing to contributing to the work. And so that's where doing the good work plays a role into my scholarship, right? I don't necessarily care to be a scholar that always writes to verify their place in academia. I personally believe that there are a lot of different ways that we can teach and learn, and it doesn't have to be centered around scholarly articles, peer review articles. I even think about podcasts that I listen to or YouTube videos, TED Talks that I listen to that are extremely powerful that I use in my pedagogy. And so I think we're getting to a space that recognizing that there's a free market on education. And really all it takes is the confidence to be able to share your knowledge in the spaces that you're already in. So most of these people are already on social media. How are you sharing your knowledge on social media? Right? To then, if you want to teach, but you don't have a PhD, how are you showing that you have a body of work? How are you showing that you are committed to contributing to a body of work? That's what doing the good work has done for me, right? it has shown that without having to be under a journal, that I can provide a body of work that provides transformation as it relates to social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so you can do that as well, but you have to build the confidence, right? You can't be afraid to say what you feel about the work that you do, because that's what scholars do. They critique the work, and they critique it not because they don't believe in it, but they critique it because they care so much about it, right? Similar to like James Baldwin and what he said about America. James Baldwin said he critiques America because he loves her, right? And we need to be able to critique our professions and our industries with a critical eye through a framework, right, that we identify with. And so one of the first frameworks that I learned to love and teach was the social change model of leadership. And so it's crazy that now that I started that in 2010, now that I'm teaching at a full-time staff, as a full-time faculty member, that is the heart of a lot of the work that I do. And I'm also thankful to be at a department and in a leadership minor that also acknowledges the social change model as the framework for the core classes. And so it's critical. But let's jump into to today's topic, Black assumptions and Black voices in the classroom. And so I recognize that my voice for many of my students is one of the first Black voices that they ever would get in a classroom, right? I might be the first Black teacher of many of my students, specifically working at a predominantly white institution. And so there's a lot of things that come with that, and we first have to acknowledge that the absence of Black faculty in institutions and higher education is a national crisis, meaning that we need a national response to, right? And a coordinated effort by the state, the federal, local government to intervene to create a national repository for effective practices and interventions that include and increase Black faculty in higher education. Also want to say that student protest specifically has been the catalyst for change in higher education as it relates to Black faculty and staff for years, over 100 years. This has been a fight by students, right, to get more Black faculty and staff into higher education. Also thinking about a big problem in higher education, and we've even seen this now with Cornell West and Harvard, is that they won't give you tenure. And also with the tenure, knowing that how we gain tenure is very much so different than what our service looks like in an institution. And so I can be a Black faculty member and you love and respect the work that I do with students of color, but then that is not articulated as service to the institution. Therefore, I don't get tenure for the extra work that I'm doing that my white colleagues are not doing, right? That is a problem, because what I see is that our students of color and white students, right, are coming to to faculty of color, specifically Black faculty and staff, and saying, hey, can you support me in my social change effort? And then that's not acknowledged as work or service that is tenurable. But that is the thing that students are coming to us for all the time. And so, Black faculty, we face disproportionate challenges as it relates to the classroom. And not just that, but also we face a disproportionate amount of critique from students as it relates to our work in the classroom. You will see that across the board. Black faculty get way less good evaluations, and it's because they come from communities where they're used to critiquing Blackness as a service to them and not as an educational support system of them. Okay, I'm gonna say that one more time. Black faculty and staff get evaluated unjustly because we see Blackness as a service to a person and not a support system to a person's growth. Okay. And so you see black people as a product that can be bought. I should service you instead of teach you, right? You deserve a good grade from me because I should be happy that you're in my classroom, not you are in my classroom to learn how to shift your mindset because you've never gotten this perspective from another teacher. And so here's some assumptions of what it's like to be a black faculty member on campus. I would say for predominantly white institutions, specifically my white students, they are segregated and socialized in whiteness and they don't know it. And so today we live in more segregated communities than we did in the 60s. And so racially segregated neighborhoods, schools, churches make it almost impossible for white students to arrive on a college campus and be okay with their black faculty member breaking down the history the untold history that they've been taught that's usually uninformed or lack a black perspective. Not only am I trying to shift the students' thinking, the dissonance is, I'm not just fighting against your thought, the student, it's your grandma, it's your mom, it's your auntie, it's your uncle, it's your racist cousin, it's your racist niece and nephews, it's your racist church, it's your racist schools and high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, the racist teachers that you learn from. That's a lot of fight, okay? I don't think if people understand how much desocialization a black faculty member has to do when they're talking about racial justice with white students. And also, we're the only people really talking about this in this way. I even work in a college of ed, and, a lot of well-intended people that still just are like, I don't know what to do. Still, we have faculty who are administrators, high executive leaders in higher education who are like, I can't believe this has been the issue. I'm just shocked that I just wasn't even aware. And I'm like, it wasn't that you wasn't aware, you didn't care. You know what I'm saying? People told you, you decided that wasn't enough. Somebody had to be killed, right? And you had to see it on video for you to then recognize that some of the things that people have taught you and told you about racism in America has been going on for years. Black faculty also come into hostile environments, especially as it relates to race, right? And so the feelings of marginalization and isolation are clear when we are like, how do we as a department, right, address racial justice? And no other faculty member has anything to say. Usually a lot of them are like, a lot of them don't even have any articles by black faculty or black scholars. They don't have any, they don't bring any guest speakers. Many of these, especially white faculty, don't even have black friends and scholars to even work with, right? So let me get to these. I love these comments. Keep these comments coming. We were well past the point of using it was 100% Amelia, right? They had plenty of opportunities and they chose to ignore them, right? Melissa said black faculty is missing in a lot of fields, 100%, right? But we don't want to the institution doesn't want to talk about why that is, right? Like the institution doesn't want to talk about the hostile environments in which that black faculty are having to interview for these jobs for, right? They don't want to talk about how black folks have been historically, systematically excluded from opportunities to become educated enough and credentialed enough to be able to become faculty. They don't even want to talk about the credentialing system of becoming faculty and how getting a PhD makes it so that you are creating a funnel where not many black people even exist in, right? And so, very similar to what Fallon is saying. Like we get hired into these jobs where it's only only one other one, right? Well, maybe two. And then if you get to the hard sciences, it's even fewer, right? And so we need to be talking about, well, not we, but these higher education leaders need to be talking more deeper about why this is not happening, right? Another assumption is that Black congregation needs surveillance. And so thinking about Black assumptions in Black voices, especially in the classroom, I think about when me and my Black friends or family or community is gathered in a space in a higher education space or a university, and how they like, oh well, we got to separate the Black people so that don't all y'all sit together. But I don't see you saying that to the white people. I don't see you saying that to the 18 white people sitting at the same table, like saying, oh, all the white people can't sit together, right? How Black congregation, as far as even students, right? Like when Black students get together, it is seen as a threat to institutions, right? They can't, they must be conjuring up something against us, right? And that's an assumption that leads to police brutality, unfair and unjust sentencing and judicial systems in higher education, right? Like, how are we acknowledging the fact that Black congregation and the need for surveillance is historically connected to how governments has assassinated Black leaders in communities, right? Structural racism, 100%, right? Coming back to, even like, it's so important for us to acknowledge that those type of ideologies and those type of practices are not new in institutions, and they have often led to the killings and murder of Black leaders in communities, especially leaders who are progressing policies in benefit of Black people. That's how anti-Black institutions are and have been for forever. And until we acknowledge that, right? Until we acknowledge the anti-Blackness in higher education and how that's connected to federal, state, local government, hospitals, right? K-12 schools, businesses, real estate ownership, right? Like, until we connect in that, we won't come up with a comprehensive plan that addresses it. We'll see it as only one issue. This is a higher education issue, but we don't see that if we don't do anything about K-12, right? If we don't do anything about community and real estate, right? If we don't do anything about these things that are connected, right? Because when I think about real estate, your taxes go to the school and your community, and so if specifically Black community real estate is not valued at the value that it should be, then the taxes are decreased. Then what we get is private schools moving into neighborhoods that got way more resources for that community, that attracts all the what you would say, I guess, I don't know, advanced. They recruit the best Black kids that they can get, and guess who end up going to the public schools, right? And then the public schools lose more money, right? Because they don't have the student numbers to get. And then that entail they are not graduating these students, which in turn, they are graduating these students to not be scholars, to not be educators, to not be going to college. And then we think that it's only a higher education problem that faculty don't exist in higher education. It's all connected. Thinking about how do we make the classroom more inclusive? So first and foremost, one of the things that I do is I start every class with highlight, shout outs, announcements, gratitude. And people think that that's like a very that's not really nothing, right? But what it does is it's a relational approach that allows for the students to have some voice in what the classroom feels, looks, and is interpreted as. when a student is like, yo, like we got this event going on, or yo, support our charity event, or yo, support our charity for blank. They do that in a way to be able to let students know what's going on. Then I also allow for space for me to kind of share a highlight. I usually do that, a highlight or a shout out or something like that every class. So they're used to me not just talking about pedagogy, but they're also used to me building a relationship with them that is not just about your grades, but it's about your life, right? Because I personally believe I'm impacting their lives, not just their profession. And then when a George Floyd happens, right? When a Breonna Taylor happens, we already have created a norm where we talk about what's going on in our lives. And so I can share with them what has happened in the community and how are folks being impacted by that, right? I can allow for space for students to check in on Black women after Breonna Taylor was murdered. If I do this every single class, I think people don't talk about, or faculty especially, again, well-intended people, smart individuals love them, right? Love being a faculty member. At the same time, I'm also very critical that being a faculty member is not just about teaching, right? It's about connecting. For me, I teach leadership. I teach leadership studies, so it's very different than leadership development. But I believe leadership is about building community. Shout out, thank you, Fallon, right? I start with talking about what's going on in the world before lecturing as well, 100%, right? Because also that is a strategy for me to be seen as a human, because I know that I know that there's preconceived notions that students bring into the classroom about Black people. That's not necessarily the same as white people, right? And so what I do is I get them to see me as a human individual first, right? Recognizing that the highlight, shout outs, announcements, gratitude create space for them to see me as an individual that is a first generation college student, that, out of my immediate family, I have the highest education. Out of my immediate family, out of all of my cousins, I think I'm the first one to own a home, or maybe the second one to own a home. But, like, all of that stuff plays a role in my life, right? And also in my pedagogy, right? Matea, I love that, right? She talks about a complete degree. It's so much about relationships. I think so much of that is kind of an approach that comes from out of our own experiences at PWIs and Connected, and the connections and mentors that helps us through 100%. And not just those folks that help us through, but I think we're diving deeper into why it is needed for why Black folks in faculty positions are needed to help students through in their process of understanding people of color and Blackness in their profession, right? Like I get it. Like a lot of these, I'm thinking like social work. A lot of these programs are great social work programs that don't teach nothing about Black culture in these programs, and then send these social workers out into Black communities. I'm thinking about like Detroit or whatever, right? That has never learned how to engage from a Black person, and then never learned pedagogy around their industry from a Black person. How is that going to impact how that person shows up in the profession? How is that going to impact that person when they show up in the community? Many teachers at the college level completely disregard the relationship aspect of the classroom, 100%. I also think about like reflecting on materials included by Black culture, about Black culture in the classroom, like curriculum, like in the syllabi. I could probably think of, maybe on the top of my hand, maybe 5 teachers that included pedagogy from Black scholars in our classroom. Like my students get introduced to not just Black scholars, women scholars, LGBT scholars, right? Like scholars who grew up poor, scholars from another country. We often watch videos of scholars who don't speak, English is not their first language, right? And they're like, yo, like that was hard for me to hear or hard for me to listen to because of the English language barrier. And I'm like, yo, first and foremost, how is that going to impact your work when you get into the profession? You're not going to service people just because they can't speak English or they're not their first, they can't speak English as well as you, or English is not their first language. So that's how you're going to show up, right? Like introducing students to that critical thought process is just as important as the critical thought process that comes out of the discipline. Okay. Also, faculty members are deemed as experts. And so many of them excuse not putting Black scholarship into their work because they don't feel like they're an expert on Blackness, right? And that's just a cop-out. To me, at least, I think that's a cop-out. And so just because you're not an expert on something doesn't mean that you can't add it into your space and add it into your pedagogy and use it as an opportunity for you to teach yourself and others. Again, I come from the frame of I was not the diversity guy until I was teaching diversity frameworks that I wasn't practicing in my own life. I volunteered because I was one of the only Black males, young Black males in that space. And I thought maybe I should do it because nobody else looks like me at my age. Thinking, I was 23, 22 years old, coming out of college with a master's degree, working at a Division I institution. And so I'm the only 23-year-old professional, a Black male professional, right? Like, so of course I'm like, I'm going to do it because I think it's important. And then we need to create structures that allow for our students to teach us. Especially allowing Black students space to be able to teach the teacher about their culture, right? Like being able to create space where students can present their ideologies, their position, their thoughts, their critiques on my work, their world, my world as I see it, higher education, however, right? We got a comment from Candace. So it blows my mind how white teachers, it's crazy how white teachers are blown when their students are more engaged when they include, I'm assuming, information from non-white sources. I'm like, really? Yeah, exactly. Right? 100% baffled by the fact that there's Black scholars out there that's actually talking work. And I mean, like, I even have faculty members that I learn from currently that don't even believe that critical race theory is its own framework of understanding race. They think that people just made it up. And I'm like that's the type of dissonance that students are even working through with their faculty, their teachers, right? Is that your personal views on theoretical frameworks is impeding against your ability to build a relationship with a Black student because you don't believe that their experiences is steeped in frameworks that are acknowledged by academia. That's deep. I'm going to say that again. That's deep. Faculty and teachers' personal experiences impede their relationship with Black students by not recognizing their experiences that are connected to frameworks that are recognized by academia. And so for my faculty member to believe, no doubt, I appreciate you, sis. So my faculty members to believe that critical race theory is not even a thing is a total negation of me and my work, right? And not just my work, but also my existence in higher education. Hey, Nicole, thank you. Shout out. I appreciate you always. Right. So I'm going to wrap this thing up right now in the little bow here because I don't want to. I got people listening. I always said I want to, stay to my 30 minutes, but I appreciate all the love and all the likes. Right. Like So how to fight exclusion on college campuses. So we need to first train people on how to discuss racial issues. Like, I get it. Like, I have the opening conversations on race. It's an 8-step framework. And I oftentimes get people are like, all right, we want this webinar. We want the 8 steps, but we only got 90 minutes. And I'm like, this is a whole day workshop if you really want. And they like, oh, well, you could have added some activities into that, but we only got an hour. And I'm like, how? Like, you're not going to piecemeal my work, right? Because that's again, that's the servitude mindset, then how we look at Black trainers, Black leaders, Black scholars, Black educators. It's like, I want to pick and choose what you do for me to help me understand your work. And I'm like, nah, if you getting me for 60 minutes, you getting 8 steps in a webinar, and I'm really going to create a space for you to ask questions. And that's about it. If you want the workshop, you need to give me a whole day. You can't give me 90 minutes and be like, I need 4 activities. I wish that was an activity. I wish that step was an activity. You're not going to piecemeal my work, because then we don't get through all of it. And then at the end of you like, oh, well, you could have you went over time. So now I'm, like the critique of Blackness, right? We need to both establish safe and brave spaces. And so the difference between safe and brave spaces. I personally believe if you're addressing racial justice, racial injustice, racial inclusion, white supremacy, it's not safe. It's an assumption that it can be safe, right? It's an assumption that whoever is going to come in there going to feel like they're going to be safe. When I'm talking, especially white people, when I'm talking about white supremacy and white identity development, white normality, you're not going to feel comfortable. And so therefore, you're not going to feel like it's a safe space. But you need to be brave enough to recognize that talking about hard topics is going to make you uncomfortable. Okay? Like, I can't talk about 400 years of oppression and be like, yeah, it's going to be safe. Right? For even Black people. I can't open up the space about slavery and be like, all Black people are going to feel comfortable talking about slavery. Right? It's 100% what Valen said, right? It's the fear of having to recognize the biases and racism that exist that allows them to feel like, oh, well, this ain't safe enough for me, so I don't have to involve myself in it, right? But the reality is you ain't brave enough, right? You ain't courageous enough, right? You ain't courageous enough to dive into your own isms, your own biases, to be able to acknowledge that as a learning piece for a community, because we operate in a space where faculty especially have to be experts. That means that they are the most smart, right? They're the most knowledgeable. They operate as if their knowledge is perfect. And so since many of these faculty members, especially faculty members at predominantly white campuses who are not Black, have not explored Blackness and their contribution to the oppressions of Black people, they don't feel like they have to even be in the space like that. They don't even know what it means to be brave in a space like that because they've never done it. You know what I'm saying? And so they're just confused. They're like, and instead of looking at that as an opportunity to be able to develop authentic, sustained interracial interactions that allow for communities to grow by providing real life examples of how to use tools to examine your own biases. You don't want to do that publicly, right? You want to be always seen as the expert. But the reality is, if you ain't brave enough to even talk about it, you can't even be an expert in that space. And most likely, you're not as prepared to talk about that in your own discipline. Most likely. We need to, of course, spread anti-racist narratives, right? So finding multiple ways to counter harmful anti-Black stereotypes. So one thing that I think about is like testing, standardized testing, hugely anti-Black. especially when like Fallon and I, we grew up. I mean, we went to high school at a school literally not even a mile down has a $3 million football field, whereas our high school doesn't even have an actual field that we can play on that's our own, right? Their high school has their high school has a library, right, that's worth $5 million. Our library, I don't even remember having an assignment that we even went to the library for in high school. Like, I think I remember having that back room where we had like 5 computers, maybe 10 computers, right? Whereas the high school, literally not even a mile down the street, private school, has a computer lab with all the gadgets and tools, right? Like, we don't want to talk about how that impacts testing, right? We want to just say, well, black folks ain't quite at the college level, right? But what we also don't want to talk about is the standardized test prep that's included into the curriculum of a private school. That's not included in the curriculum of a public school. And our school was predominantly 98%, 99% black. And then you expect all of us to show up with 25 and above of the ACT. Like, I mean, my ACT score is terrible, right? Terrible. And it wasn't because I didn't try hard. Like, I did. I had no idea even how to study for a standardized test, let alone do well on it. Again, and then, my mom worked third shift. Like, she wasn't sitting up with me talking about what it takes to be successful on a standardized test. Like, she was like, "Oh, you going to college?" Like, that's how my mom talked to me. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, these anti-racist narratives, these anti-black narratives that operate in existence that impact higher education, we don't want to talk about those things. I appreciate you, niece, right? And then we need to develop responsive pedagogy. So instructors need to consider adopting culturally responsive pedagogy, also known as culturally relevant, culturally congruent, culturally reflective, culturally centered, culturally sensitive, culturally synchronized, culturally contextualized pedagogy. Okay, it's a lot of different ways in which that we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy. But you need to look at curricula, right? What is in the syllabus, right? We need to also look at how do we build learning communities. So how do we allow space for students to teach students? How do we allow space for students to teach us? How do we allow space for cultural student reflection in the classroom? We need to also allow for cross-cultural communications, right? And then instruction, right? Like, how do we use pop culture? How do we use YouTube? How do we use hip hop pedagogy to interact with our students? What we know is that our students listen to rap. What these faculties don't do is they acknowledge that is also a part of the culture of that community in the classroom. So how do we engage in that? Right? And I ain't saying you should be going out there rapping. Like, I ain't saying that. There's plenty of books out there by rappers. There's plenty of scholarships out there by rappers. There's plenty of work out there by rappers that you can use to supplement your instruction, right? To create space. YouTube is my friend too, Fallon. And it's TED Talks, right? One of my favorite TED Talks, which is it's probably one of the most famous TED Talks out there, is The Dangers of a Single Story. But I use a lot of the other ones. And I just found a few more that I'm going to use that too. So TED Talks is a really, really good one as well to introduce, again, students to black speakers, black educators, black folk. Connect with me. Got lots of books, okay? Lots of books. So it just depends on what you're looking for, Matea, right? lots of books, but off the top of the dome, as far as like, understanding Blackness, I think we got to go. I like to go back, right? So like the Miseducation of the Negro, I think by Carter G. Woodson, is a good one. Kind of bringing it forward, right? You have, Michelle Alexander. I can't remember the title of the book right now. You have Nobody by Mark Lamont Hill. You got, everybody's talking about Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I think is a good book. I don't have anything a problem with him in the book, right? I think it's the webinar that I have a problem with. And I think we need to find ways to be able to practice more cultural humility. We need to be more interculturally competent. We need to understand and interrogate our own mental models. So this is coming from an article that I was able to co-author for Diverse Higher Education. Diverse issues in higher education with other authors. So shout out to Dr. Michelle Parker, for bringing me in on that one. But we need to look at critical consciousness. Like how are we looking at frameworks that brought us to where we are? And then how are we critiquing those frameworks to examine our privileges, our beliefs, our practices, our assumptions, our norms, how power and privilege operate and contribute to inequity and oppression in our societies based on our own learnings. Okay. And so, hey, I'm glad that folks got something out of this. I'm so excited to continue doing these. I think I'm going to keep doing these lives. And so let me know what will be a great topic that you want me to cover, or want me to continue on. I'm going to keep doing these beyond Black history because I feel like folks are just getting good stuff out of this. And so let me know whatever I can do to help you on your journey, of course, right? Whatever live session I can do on Facebook. Again, this is free. I can do this all day, right? Like I grew up in Black Bible school, right? Like I have no problem taking up time. Okay. My niece Chakia know that, you know what I'm saying? Like no problem taking up space. So, hey, shout out to everybody who showed up, and also folks who watch the replay. Let me know if there's any, I'm working on my YouTube channel right now. So for folks who are, watching the replay, let me know whatever topics I should be covering. I'm really excited to continue this journey with y'all and just doing lives with you because I like doing these. Yo, always and forever, what I always got to end my stuff with is keep doing the good work.